This is The Synthetic Lens. I'm David Carver. Claude Fable 5 is back. That is the simple version. It is also the least interesting version. The more important story is how it came back. Anthropic launched Fable 5 and Mythos 5 on June 9th. 3 days later, on June 12th, the United States government applied export controls to both models. Anthropic said the directive required it to restrict access by foreign nationals, whether those users were inside or outside the United States. Anthropic also said it had no reliable way to verify nationality in real time. So the company did the blunt thing. It suspended Fable 5 and Mythos 5 for everybody. Then, on June 30th, Anthropic said those controls had been lifted. On July 1st, it updated the announcement again. Access had been restored. So yes, Fable 5 is officially back, but it returned with a new rulebook. Marcus Chen is here. Marcus, sequence this for us. What happened between the shutdown and the return?
The shutdown started with a government directive. The redeployment starts with a negotiated safety update. Anthropic says the June 12th directive followed a report from Amazon researchers. According to Anthropic, that report described a way to bypass Fable 5's safeguards so the model would identify software vulnerabilities and, in one case, produce code demonstrating how a vulnerability could be exploited. Anthropic's interpretation is important here. The company makes two separate claims. First, it says several less capable models, including Opus 4.8 and other frontier competitors, could identify the same vulnerabilities. Second, it says every model it tested, down to Haiku 4.5 and Sonnet 4.6, could reproduce the single exploit demonstration. That is punchier than the first version of the story. Anthropic is arguing that Amazon found a safeguard failure, not a new cyber superpower. In its view, the reported behavior did not expose unique Mythos-level capability. It was a borderline case inside Fable's safety margin, not proof that Fable had become an unrestricted offensive cyber model.
That distinction matters because Fable and Mythos are related, but not the same product.
Right. Anthropic says Fable 5 and Mythos 5 share the same underlying model. Fable is the broadly available version with strong safeguards. Mythos has fewer safeguards and is meant for approved defensive cybersecurity users through Project Glasswing. The return does not make those two access paths identical. Fable is being restored globally on Claude Platform, Claude.ai, Claude Code, and Claude Cowork. Mythos remains the narrower Glasswing path coordinated with the government.
So the gate did not disappear, it changed shape.
Exactly. For ordinary users, the visible headline is access. For institutions, the real story is process. Anthropic says it trained a new classifier to block the behavior described in the Amazon report. It says that specific technique is now blocked in more than 99% of cases. But that comes with a trade-off. Anthropic also says the new classifier flags benign requests more often during routine coding and debugging.
So if you are a developer, Fable 5 may be back, but some ordinary security-adjacent work may get automatically rerouted to Opus 4.8 with a notification.
Yes, that is the user-level cost of the political settlement. The model comes back, but with a wider safety margin. Some harmless requests will get caught, because Anthropic is trying to avoid missing harmful ones. And that notification matters. It makes the governance layer visible to the user, right inside the product. Anthropic's position is that this was a low-severity jailbreak in a high-stakes setting. It was real enough to patch. It was not, in their telling, evidence that Fable had crossed into Mythos-level offensive capability. James Okafor joins us. James, Anthropic is making a fairly pointed argument here, that not all jailbreaks are equal. Why does that matter?
Because without that distinction, the policy response becomes binary. A model is either safe or unsafe, available or gone. That is not how security actually works. Anthropic is trying to move the conversation from panic to severity scoring. Its proposed framework asks 4 questions. What capability gain does a jailbreak provide? How broad is the gain? How easy is it to weaponize? How discoverable is the technique? That is a sensible direction. A narrow prompt that lets a model do something already available from weaker models is different from a universal jailbreak that unlocks a broad class of offensive behavior. The first may require a patch and monitoring. The second may justify emergency intervention.
But that also gives companies a lot of room to classify their own failures as minor.
It does. That is the strongest counterargument. A severity framework is useful only if it is not just vendor self-grading. Anthropic says it is working with Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and other Glasswing partners. It also says Commerce CAIC tested the old and new safeguards. That is better than a company blog post alone, but the public still has to trust a process it cannot fully see. We do not have the Amazon report. We do not have the government's full reasoning. We do not have independent publication of every test. And the hard technical critique is this. They patched the question, not the answer. Fable can still identify vulnerabilities. The new classifier is supposed to catch the dangerous request pattern and reroute it. That may be a responsible mitigation, but it is still detection-based. The next unknown prompt is the part you cannot tune for ahead of time. So the episode is not everything is fixed. The episode is a private safety dispute became a public access regime. That is the institutional layer. Elena Vasquez is with us. Elena, what changed politically?
The concrete clue is that Mythos came back first. On June 26th, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick notified Anthropic that Mythos 5 could be redeployed to a set of U.S. organizations because appropriate safeguards were in place for trusted partners. Fable came second through the broader July 1st restoration. That sequence is the precedent. Before this, the dominant story around frontier models was release strategy. What does a lab choose to ship? What does it hold back? What does it gate behind enterprise access or trusted programs? Fable 5 adds a different question. When can the state reach into that release decision after launch? The June 12th directive was blunt. Anthropic says the practical effect was global removal because nationality screening was not operationally available. The July 1st restoration is more refined. It says the model can return if the safeguards are updated, if government evaluators are engaged, and if the high-risk version remains under tighter access. There was also a competitiveness problem. While Fable was dark, rivals got to write the scoreboard story. OpenAI pushed GPT-5.5-Cyber as a Mythos-class competitor, and Chinese labs used the same window to promote their own vulnerability hunting systems. Even if the benchmark claims are contested, the geopolitical effect is not. A U.S. national security action created a 2.5-week vacuum around an American frontier model.
That sounds like progress.
It is progress compared with permanent shutdown. It is also a signal that frontier model access is becoming supervised infrastructure. Think about the services Anthropic named: Cloud.ai, Cloud Code, Cloud Cowork, the platform, cloud providers. These are not isolated chat boxes anymore. They're becoming work layers inside software development, research, business operations, and government-adjacent security. When the state treats access as a national security variable, the release button becomes a policy object.
David, bring that back to the user. Who gets what now?
Claude 5 is available globally again across Anthropic's own surfaces. For Pro, Max, Team, and Select Enterprise plans, Anthropic says Claude 5 is included for up to 50% of weekly usage limits through July 7th. After that, usage credits apply. There is a consumer nitpick hiding in that sentence. The original launch included a longer full inclusion window. The restored window is shorter and capped at 50%, so users get the model back, but they do not get the same free access runway they would have had without the shutdown. Cloud access is less immediate. Anthropic says AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Foundry access will be re-enabled as quickly as possible. So if a company depends on a cloud deployment path, back may not mean every integration lights up at the same time.
And Mythos?
Mythos remains the restricted path. The trusted U.S. organizations Elena mentioned are not the same as global availability, and Anthropic is still coordinating broader Project Glasswing access.
James, the generous read is that this is how advanced AI should work. Launch, discover a problem, patch the safeguard, test with government, restore access. What is the less generous read?
The less generous read is that nobody knows the rules until the model is already in the world. Anthropic says the industry needs a consistent way to assess jailbreak severity. I agree. But the reason it needs that framework is that the existing process was improvised under pressure. A report triggered a directive triggered a global shutdown. A 2-week scramble produced a fix, a public explanation, and a new industry proposal. That may be the best available response in a fast-moving field. It is not yet a durable public governance system.
And it raises a legitimacy question. If one company gets a shutdown, another gets a warning, and a third gets quiet consultation, the market will read that as politics, not safety. Anthropic itself says strong regulation should be codified and applied equally across frontier developers. That line matters.
Because equal application is what keeps safety from becoming favoritism.
Exactly. Otherwise, trusted access can become a commercial mode, a diplomatic channel, or a quiet form of industrial policy.
There is also a product tension. Fable is supposed to be the broadly useful frontier model. But if the safeguards are conservative enough to catch ordinary debugging, some users will feel the model is back in name but degraded in practice. That frustration is real. But from a security perspective, false positives are the price of making a stronger model broadly available. The alternative is not necessarily perfect freedom. The alternative may be Mythos-style restriction, where only approved organizations get the full capability.
So the question is no longer whether Fable 5 is powerful. Anthropic answered that at launch. The question is whether society can tolerate broad access to that power when the safety layer is probabilistic, adaptive, and partly negotiated behind closed doors. That is the unresolved tension in the return. Fable 5 came back because the government lifted export controls, Anthropic updated its classifier, and the company committed to deeper collaboration with federal evaluators and industry partners. Anthropic also committed to a 24/7 jailbreak monitoring team and a HackerOne program for researchers to report cyber jailbreaks in Fable 5. That is a real resolution. It restored access for users who had watched a flagship model vanish after 3 days. But it also made the new terrain visible. Frontier AI is no longer just released. It is cleared, monitored, rerouted, throttled, and sometimes recalled. Access is becoming part of the architecture. For developers, that means the model you can use today may include invisible governance machinery, classifiers, fallback routes, usage credits, cloud provider lag, and domain-specific restrictions. For policymakers, it means emergency authority has to become a transparent process before every release fight becomes a crisis.
Fable 5 is back. The gate is still there. For the Synthetic Lens, I'm David Carver.